Hello and welcome to All Hallows. The following reflection is based on John chapter 15, verses 1 to 17. One of my memories from childhood is picking blackberries from my grandparents' bush. My nan would give me a plastic bowl and I'd walk down their garden path, which obviously wasn't as long as I seem to remember it being, and I'd disappear into that mysterious behind the shed world where Grandad stored things and where the blackberry bush grew. I'd be careful just to pick the black blackberries and not the red or the green ones, leaving them to ripen so that I could pick them next week or in a couple of weeks' time. Years later, when Graham and I moved into an old original vicarage, I discovered blackberries and apples and pears growing in the garden there. And this time, I wasn't only able to pick the fruit, but make them into crumbles for my family to enjoy. This particular chapter of John's Gospel begins with one of the 7 I am sayings of Jesus. I am the true vine. And if you're in church, you will see one of the banners hanging up depicting these words. And Jesus expounds this metaphor throughout these verses, intermingling it with his desire and his need for his followers to love one another. Today, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows his time is near. There also seems so much left to say to the disciples, so much left to teach them. It's not hard to imagine Jesus in the garden, in his anxiety, in his distress, in his desire, surrounded by all that grew there, and spying a vine, he points to it, seeking to get the disciples to understand further and deeper and more. He says to them, I am the vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, whilst every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be more fruitful. There's great intimacy and knowledge of the Godhead shared here, and in the revelation that follows. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. My command is this, that you love one another as I have loved you. How painfully acute must the Father's love have felt by Jesus as he prepares to do his Father's ultimate will and undergo separation from the love of God through the love of God through his death on the cross. What we are eavesdropping on here is an intimate, intense discourse Jesus was having with the disciples. He's just celebrated the Last Supper and sent Judas out to betray him. Having set the final wheels in motion for what lays ahead over the course of the next few days, Jesus now seeks to comfort his disciples. And as he does so, he talks to them about remaining in him, even though he is about to leave them, and commanding, not asking or suggesting, but commanding them to love one another, a theme he constantly returns to in our reading today. This was not the first time that command had been given that night. Just before they left the upper room, Jesus issued the same words, but now, this second time, they're followed with a commission, an urgent commission. Everything I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. The work of the disciples was not yet done. In fact, maybe it was just beginning. Jesus may be going back to his Father's house, but the disciples, those whom he had chosen and called and equipped to carry out his command of loving one another as he had loved them, were not going anywhere. Not yet, because their mission was still largely in front of them. Last week, Archdeacon Mike McGurk preached on the early verses of John's Gospel, Jesus calling Philip and Nathanael, and Mike asked how ready we are to carry out God's mission. Today, as we near the end of that Gospel, the message is still the same. If we've been chosen and appointed by God to go and bear fruit fruit that will last. How are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? In years to come, will someone be able to pinpoint the start or a milestone in their journey of faith because of the fruit that we have borne in God's name, being so long-lasting that lives have been changed? And if we as followers of Christ are carrying out his command, not his requests, not Jesus' suggestion, to love one another as Christ has loved us, how are we doing that? And what does it mean to do so? John, the Gospel writer, was so touched, so moved, so affected and changed by Jesus' command to love one another as I have loved you. But in his first letter, he's almost falling over himself to get the point across to its original recipients. Read your way through 1 John and you will discover for yourself. For 1 John chapter 3, verse 23, this is his command, to love one another. 1 John chapter 4, verse 11, since God so loved us, we ought to love one another. We've all been through unprecedented times, and we continue to live through them. We've learnt to worship, to work, and to love together in new ways as we emerge from this lockdown and anticipate a return to the familiar in the summer. Are we just going to pick up and try and carry on from where we left off? Or do we need to recognise that we have been pruned to such a degree that we are now ready to bear new fruit, fruit of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control? Let us all take time this week to pray about the lasting fruit that God is appointing us to bear, and in how carrying out his command we may love one another more. Amen.